Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes, by Gvoke HypoPen, the first premixed autoinjector for very low blood sugar, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, the DiabetesMine Innovation Days is always a great time to catch up on the latest technology and get a sneak peek at what's coming. This is the conference where we are not waiting. The phrase was coined in 2013, which almost seems like ancient history now.
Stuff that seemed like such a pipe dream at the time, like this whole idea of a closed loop system, it was like kind of eye roller, but now we have a very viable do-it-yourself homemade pancreas closed loop system, which I'm using, by the way. I've been looping now for quite a while, and it's a game changer.
That's Amy Tenderich from DiabetesMine, who puts this conference on twice a year. This time around, there was also a big focus on inclusion and representation. Lots of info to share. In Tell Me Something Good, a diaversary to celebrate. 14 years of type 1 in my house. Benny was diagnosed the first weekend of December in 2006. And I just remembered a funny story from that week that I haven't told before. I was always the worst. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am so glad to have you here. I am your host, Stacey Simms, and we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. As I said in that intro, my son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2, 14 years ago this week. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, in radio and television, local news, and that is how you get a podcast. I'm going to be talking about Benny's diaversary later on in the show. I will tell you a rather silly story that I just remembered about our first weekend home from the hospital. So about a week after we got home and we went out, we had theater tickets. I will tell you that story later on in the show. But stick around. It's a funny one. And I think it kind of sets the tone for how we manage diabetes and continue to this day. Oh, my goodness. I also want to let you know that Friends for Life is having another conference, a virtual conference. And if you are listening as this show is first airing, Friends for Life is happening this Friday and through the weekend, December 4th, 2020. And along with the incredible educational opportunities and the wonderful social stuff that they have, great meetups, I am also doing my annual game show. I do a version of NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is a really fun game show if you've ever listened to it. I do Wait, Wait, Don't Poke Me. And I have taped that, and we will be airing it and premiering it this Friday. So definitely come by and please check that out. I will link up all the registration information for Friends for Life from the wonderful folks at Children with Diabetes. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on this episode. As you know, every episode has pretty extensive show notes where I link up information. And I also put a transcript now for every episode in 2020. And we are starting to work backwards. So hopefully, eventually, I'll have a transcript for every episode of the show. Thanks for your patience on that. All right, talking to Amy Tenderich from DiabetesMine in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, and OneDrop is diabetes management for the 21st century. OneDrop was designed by people with diabetes for people with diabetes. OneDrop's glucose meter looks nothing like a medical device. It's sleek, compact, and seamlessly integrates with the award-winning OneDrop mobile app. Sync all your other health apps to OneDrop to keep track of the big picture and easily see health trends. And with a OneDrop subscription, you get unlimited test strips and Lancets delivered right to your door. Every OneDrop plan also includes access to your own certified diabetes coach. Have questions but don't feel like waiting for your next doctor visit? Your personal coach is always there to help. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo to learn more. My guest this week can be summed up, I think, in the motto of the conference we're about to talk about. Learn, connect, collaborate. Amy Tenderich was diagnosed with type 1 as an adult in 2003, and not long after that, she started the website DiabetesMine, which is a terrific source of news and information in our community. Seriously, if you are not reading it, I'll put a link in the show notes. Make it a bookmark. Do they even say that anymore? Put it in your reading list. Do they say that anymore? Make sure you check out DiabetesMine because, all kidding aside, they do a tremendous job on reporting in-depth news information in our community. If you're interested at all in technology, if you want to learn personal fun stories too. They do that. It's a great deep dive, and I rely on it for a lot of information I share here on the show. Of course, I always credit them. But in 2013, Amy started organizing the D-Data Exchange, twice yearly events that focus on technology and breakthroughs. This year, Amy added topics about diversity and representation in the diabetes community. It's something she was already working on, as you'll hear, before the events of this year brought it to the forefront for many people who maybe hadn't considered that before. But Amy was already on it. Lots of information here, and I'll look forward, of course. It's always great to catch up with Amy. Amy, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about D-Data. I really appreciate it, and this conference is always so interesting to talk about, so thanks.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. The first question really has to be just the difference this year in terms of making everything virtual. You know, I was in some of the conference presentations. I have to say, this was a cool looking online conference. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about were you pleased the way it went? I know at the beginning of the year, it must have been kind of crazy to regroup.
Absolutely. It's been a big learning curve. Obviously moving from in-person to online, no matter what kind of event you do. I mean, first of all, there was this, oh my God, I'm in the events business and now we have COVID and, you know, what's going to happen? And there was some question about whether people would still be as interested, but I feel like I've found that people are really anxious to connect because we're not going to all these in-person events. You know, most of us feel like we're just sort of out there, some kind of juggernaut on our own, trying to keep up just by clicking on links. And so having a conference that allows people to connect, I think is, you know, something that people are still really looking for. We had to do it the first time for our June event because we do these D-Data events in June and then in the fall. And so, you know, that was literally starting from scratch. Our event, as you may know, is sort of like a leadership forum. We always capped it at about 150 people max, try to keep it somewhat intimate so that, and really put an emphasis on collaboration and interactive sessions. And, you know, the networking part of it is really important. So we thought, how can we recreate that? So it's not just people sitting and watching, you know, one presentation after another, especially when everyone's doing so much of that these days on Zoom. So I've been working with the same event manager actually for years, a lovely woman out of San Francisco who helped me find this platform that is really, in fact, they do use it for much larger events, up to thousands of people. Wow. But the thing that's so special about it is it kind of recreates the experience of sort of walking into a live conference. You like sit down at a table and then you're able to immediately see and talk to the people who are at your table. And if you jump over to another table, then you're talking to that group. So it kind of looks like a Zoom breakout room, but the idea is that it's, you know, it's sort of oriented by table. And then if you want to work together with the people at your table, there's even this whiteboard function that lets people have kind of a little sandbox to play in. And so that we do, again, a lot of interactive stuff where we try to get people to talk with the group at their table and brainstorm things. So they were able to use that sort of shared space where you can draw pictures and you can post links and you know, get creative, and you can actually capture whatever your table does there as an image and save it for later if you want. So it has this great functionality that allows both live presentations, pre-recorded presentations, and then a lot of interactivity. Yeah. So it was a big learning curve. You know, it really helped me that we had done this once in June. So going into our 2-day event now in the fall, I didn't have to kind of recreate that whole wheel of just understanding how the online platform works.
You know, this conference is so well known, as you said, leadership, technology, things come out, and we'll talk about this, that, you know, years later come to market. But one of the things that you focused on early on, or even really before the conference, was this survey and discussion of representation.
So yeah, what happened there, it's actually, I'm kind of proud of myself. I mean, this was prior to the whole, you know, uprising around George Floyd and the big sort of, you know, visibility of the Black Lives Matter movement. Back in January, I was talking with Charisse Shockley and a few other people and said, you know, I feel like we should have a panel at our event to kind of delve into this. I feel like it's sort of something that's a little bit on the margins. We talk about it every now and then, but this is so not solved. And I feel like people of color are really not represented. And Charisse was all over it and said, absolutely, we need to have this conversation, and started recommending people. And so I had already spoken to Mila Clark Buckley, who you may know, and a few other people, reached out to Ariel Lawrence. And then, of course, everything kind of exploded, and it was like, okay, wow. And so in our planning sessions, I basically kind of convened this group of advocates of color. And I said, listen, you guys, I want to have a session. I think it'll be great to have a live kind of roundtable, but what else can we do? Or how do you guys want this to run? What do you think would be meaningful? So what was so cool is that group actually drove the whole content of it. So they said, listen, we're happy to come and be on a panel and talk. But, people of color are not a monolith, right? They can't represent everyone. And they said, we need to get more voices involved. So they had the idea, can we do some kind of research? Can we do a survey so we can gather, input from a larger, swath of our community? And they also said, what about a video? What if we got people to, because we had done this before for DiabetesMine with our winners. I think you're familiar with this, Stacey, where we have these people who are patient voices winners, basically applied to have a scholarship. And then if they won, we flew them out to Northern California and put them up to be part of the event. But in years past, we had those winners each do a little snippet and just them talking about, who they were and what their sort of advocacy soapbox was in the area of diabetes, if you will. So the idea was to do something along those lines where we ask a larger group of advocates of color to just say a few words about what they do and about their thoughts on, being a person of color with diabetes, what's good, what's bad, what would they like to have see change. I said, it's completely up to you guys. So I don't know if you got to see that, but we created this compilation video that started off our session, and it was really impactful because it was just people saying their bit, what's disappointed them or why they do the work they do or what they would like to see change. And it's just, I talked about this session as sort of unveiling what's been left unsaid for too long. I think that a lot of this was kind of going on behind the scenes. And some of these people of color also told me that in the past, they kind of, if they had a negative experience, they would kind of brush it off. They would just say, oh, it's kind of a one-off. It's not necessarily racism. It's just, I had a bad experience. But when they start to connect with each other and share these stories, they realize there's a lot of commonalities, of getting brushed aside, of being misdiagnosed, of sort of not being proactively told about all of the latest, technology options, because maybe a healthcare provider would sort of assume that they weren't going to be the ideal candidate for a pump or a CGM or something cutting edge. So, it seemed that there were some themes. So this group of advocates each recruited more people in their community. So we had a team of about 12 people who actually helped craft the survey questions and vet the survey, and then helped us get it out there to the community. So we had about 207 people who completed the survey. There's always some people who start and don't finish, but complete answers. And I did a whole presentation on sort of summarizing the results, which is also a video that's posted online that we'll be sharing with people. But yeah, it was just so eye-opening. So many of their concerns are similar to anyone with diabetes, right? They're worried about costs and access and, finding a physician who's empathetic and, who treats them as, as a partner in their own care and all those things. I mean, those are things that I would say are across the board for anyone with diabetes are issues. But what also became very clear is that they do not feel represented. We got very strong results that people said, both in marketing and in educational materials, they don't feel represented. They need to see more people who look like them. And that's everything from, skin adhesives to, just, seeing someone who looks like me who might actually use that product.
Wow. I mean, so much going on there. And I know a lot of people were posting that they were really excited to not only be involved in it, but to see it. And I always hate this question, but what comes next for something like that?
That's always the $1 million question. And that's actually one of the things where you feel like you're sort of a victim of your own success, because every time we have an event and people say, this was so great, what else are you going to do? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm still recovering from this. Back to our interview in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when you have a toddler with type 1, you do hear rumblings for a long time about the teen years. It hit us full force a little bit earlier than most. And I'm so glad that we had Dexcom. Benny's insulin needs started going way up around age 11. He's almost 16, and it has been an absolutely remarkable transformation, I think is really the only word for it. He's so much taller. Everything's different. I mean, I don't need to tell you what puberty does. But along with the hormone swings, I cannot imagine managing diabetes during this time without the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system. We've been able to react more quickly to highs and lows, see trends, adjust insulin doses with advice from our endo,
I know using the Dexcom G6 has helped improve Benny's A1C and overall health. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Amy, where I have asked her, what's next?
So I don't know, but you know what the fun thing is? I mean, not only the fun thing, but I think the important thing is to not try to decide that too soon. The world is changing, and these events are always about kind of what is timely and what, we try to sort of take the temperature of, what is boiling up hottest in the patient community and in the industry. So especially with our D-Data Day, with the technology side of it, we try to let the dust settle from the existing event and see where things are going. What are people talking about? Is it suddenly that smart pens are all coming out to market and people are buzzing about that? Is it some of the latest trials for the closed loop systems? Is it, sometimes it was like accuracy of, CGMs that became like a big hot button. Obviously right now, a lot of it's just about affordability and access. That's always an ongoing issue. But we really try to, and again, especially for the D-Data Day, I try to check in with the community. I'm a conduit, but I'm not one of the hardcore developers, the people who work on Loop and who make these incredible tools. So I always check in with them and say, what is the community buzzing about? What else is, who's working on something new and cool? How are people feeling about the latest commercial products that have come out? Are a lot of people, chattering about that? Do they have a lot of input? And just try to sort of find out what's happening out there and then address those things. And, really keep it fresh and timely, so that we're really having conversations about the things that are like currently on top of mind.
It's so hard to predict, certainly, right, what's going to take off, because you always have devices and people at this event that are, as you said, so cutting edge. And, certainly the DIY crowd is always well represented. So it's hard to figure out what's really going to hit. Were there any products or standouts? I saw a non-invasive CGM of some kind, like a bracelet that was there. I know Dexcom spoke. There was a Loop link. I mean, was there anything that really struck you or that you?
Well, thank you for asking. So the fall event is actually this 2-day thing where one day is kind of our broader innovation summit, which was our first event that we ever did. And then the second day is D-Data, where we go really deep on the technology. Yeah. So that's why this time, the first day, we did a featured panel on telemedicine and like whole person care. That was very cool. That included Vita Health, OneDrop, Health First, and what's the fourth group that was there? I'm gonna have to look it up. Yeah, but we really, because obviously telemedicine is now just medicine, right?
Right.
It used to be this sort of add-on thing that you could do if you wanted to, but now it's really how care is being delivered, and the whole notion of like, can we get past just focus on glucose numbers? Lots of coaching combined with technology, and then they're trying to help people with like a variety of health conditions while doing really high quality diabetes care. So we had this great talk about it. And I'm sorry, January AI was the fourth company, and they are this amazing new machine learning based company out of the Stanford area that is actually doing a platform currently for type 2 diabetes, but I think they will be expanding. And that group also did a demo on day 2. The first day, again, was kind of this broad look at like what's going on in healthcare and diabetes care. That's when we had our inclusivity and diversity panel. We also had an interactive kind of group problem solving exercise where we got people to, we had a little, it was kind of like choose your own medical adventure. we showed this video of this like a sort of mock patient and had her talk about her issues that she's facing. And then there were sort of 3 choices of what you could recommend for this woman to do as sort of her first line of defense with her diabetes care. And then we had people discuss that at their tables and decide and then vote on which one they would pick first. And then we showed how they played out in real life, and in order of what people chose as the first choice. So we got to do some really cool stuff to put people kind of in the shoes of a healthcare provider, but also in the shoes of the patient, as in, again, we have a mix of people at these events. So you've got, diabetes educators there and endocrinologists and even some like nutritionists and other people who are recommending stuff to patients. And then you have patients who are, walking the walk. And so it was kind of a cool way for them to discuss like, okay, if you recommend this to this woman, like what are the pros and cons going to be? How is this going to play out? That was really fun. We like to put people in the driver's seat and kind of see what they do, and a lot of this event is about the fact that you might have someone who is like, really big, has a big following online as a patient advocate, sitting next to, the CEO of some major pharma company, sitting next to, someone from FDA, and then all these DIY folks mixed in. And, we've got healthcare designers and we've got educators and someone who might be the head of the, Jocelyn Diabetes Center. And so they get a chance to kind of interact, and great networking, and I think really gives people a lot of perspective and helps to break down barriers between these groups.
It really does. I was there 2 years ago, and it was the first time that I was in the same room as somebody from the FDA. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. And it turns out that part of it was my fault, because as they explained to me when I asked, like, how come I haven't seen you before? They said, well, you can come to us and here's how. And I have put that information out and I will again. But it was one of those situations that, I'd been in the diabetes community for 12 years at that point. And it just hadn't occurred to me that I could have access to somebody like that. And this is a public servant, really. And they explained how to do it and, what the deal was. And it was funny to me because while I have a podcast, I'm a diabetes mom, right? So it was a really nice, lowering of what I had perceived as this boundary. And I'm sure that many other people feel that same way. It's really, as you said, it's a lot of interesting people in the same room.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, that's why I had this little panic attack when we, when they closed down all the, in-person events. I'm like, how can we recreate that? But, as much as it gets old being on online stuff all day long, it's amazing what you can accomplish, really. And, there are some, like I said, great platforms that are being improved upon. So after we used this platform in June, we actually gave them feedback about what we would like to see. And they've made some progress. Like, yeah, it's really great. So you were asking about the non-invasive CGMs and whatnot. So CGM obviously is this burgeoning area. So our opening speaker for D-Data this time on Friday, November 6th, was Kevin Sayer, the CEO of Dexcom, talking about the future of CGM. And clearly, I mean, if anyone's qualified to do that, it's them. They've sort of led the way. But there are dozens of kind of wannabe, Me Too CGM companies coming out there who are doing all kinds of stuff, from implantable to, non-invasive to semi-invasive to just straight up Dexcom copies. We did a story at DiabetesMine not long ago, something like 39 new companies working on CGMs,
Yeah.
So there are many, many of them. Obviously, the non-invasive or minimally invasive feature has been a dream for so many years. And there was this white paper written years ago called The Deceitful Turkey by an expert physician who had been researching it for so long. It's a very difficult thing to crack, to be able to get something that is accurate and really usable, that doesn't penetrate the skin at all. But then you've got companies like BioLink that are working on, like, they call minimally invasive, with these like micro needles. So it's not drawing blood, but it's sort of like pokes into the skin very minimally. Mike Hoskins and I, who's my main man at DiabetesMine, we were just talking about this the other day, that it's probably time to do another story to sort of explain where we are with non-invasive technology, because nobody's really done it yet successfully, but there are lots of companies that are just on the verge of having something really viable, which is exciting.
I'd read that story. Yes, definitely.
So, especially now that, one of the big hot topics is the idea that CGM is going to really truly become standard of care and become more widespread use, even among people who are not on intensive insulin regimen. So it's like, what is going to help them be comfortable wearing it and get the most out of it? And we had another interactive session on Friday that was all about that. It was a mock. We had people at their tables pretend that they were like a design group making a new CGM, and they had to pick their priorities for designing the CGM and talk about why they did that. And were they trying to simplify data learnings for people? Were they trying to make it more motivational to use the CGM? Or were they trying to kind of like increase the consumer appeal and have it, have this kind of sexy look and feel? But I think a lot of people agreed that, especially for non-insulin users, the physical factor of the sensor is going to be a big deal breaker, right? Yeah, there's just so much going on, and, it feels like it never changes. But then again, if you look back, it's like, wow, things have really changed so much, even since we started doing this. And
and that's what I want to ask you about too. We are not waiting. The phrase, as you obviously know, was coined at the D-Data Exchange was it the first one in 2013?
That's correct. So we started doing the Innovation Summit in 2011. So we had 2 of those events. And then the third year, it became clear that there were all these sort of people out there who were tinkering and, doing yourself, these sort of technology savvy. It started with a group of D-dads, basically diabetes dads who work in technology, who were like, hey, we can do stuff with this. So, and then we decided that we would host a get together for those folks. And we were doing the summit at Stanford School of Medicine. We just did it as a pre-day to our summit. The day before, we got this sort of classroom in this bio center directly across from the big hall, and just invited a bunch of people who happened to be, in or near the Bay Area who would be able to come. And we thought we'd have, 25 people or something. And we were smashed in this classroom with like 50 plus people. And there was all this excitement, and everybody was like sharing what they're doing. And we kind of realized like, wow, we're really onto something. And I want to give due credit to Howard Look and Brandon Arbeiter from Tidepool, who really helped me. They were just coming on the scene then too. And so we were having all these conversations, and I said, hey, I really want to do this event. You guys want to help me like get this group together? So we worked on it together. And what happened is the next day at the summit, I had asked Howard to get up and sort of summarize what happened at this D-Data Exchange thing. And he kind of, presented this term, which I believe the first person to utter it was Lane Despero, who was also a diabetes dad, as you know, and then worked at Medtronic for many years, and then was at Bigfoot for a while. But he basically said, what I'm hearing here is like, we're not waiting. We're not waiting for the, industry or for the FDA or for anyone to tell us it's okay to do this. We can do it if we're doing it.
Yeah.
And then it's, just, as you know, absolutely blossomed from there. So
as you look back at that, it's been 7 years. And it seems like, as you had said earlier, it seemed like things are moving so slowly and things would never change. And now, sure, there's a long way to go, right? It's not perfect. But now we have hybrid closed loops on the commercial level. We have more DIY stuff. We have DIY stuff that might be going to the FDA soon, thanks to Tidepool. When you look at the last 7 years and your own diabetes management, if you don't mind me asking, what are your thoughts about how far we've come since Lane said it and Howard wrote it on the whiteboard? We are not waiting. It's pretty remarkable to look back at these 7 years.
It's absolutely remarkable. And it's stuff that seemed like such a pipe dream at the time, like this whole idea of a closed loop system. It was like kind of eye roller, but now we have a very viable do-it-yourself homemade pancreas closed loop system, which I'm using, by the way. I've been looping now for quite a while. And it's a game changer, and now the industry is coming out with them. It's a little slower. And obviously on the industry side, they have to, there's so much risk averseness. They need to be really careful. So they're, have to make incremental changes, but we're getting there. I think soon, again, the idea of just getting a pump without a CGM or even a smart insulin pen without something connected to it will just seem silly, because it's like, of course you want to have the whole deal so that you can both continuously monitor your blood sugar and then also get help or have it automated to decide your dosing, your ideal dosing amounts. So we've come a hugely long way. Insulin pens were dumb back then, and people talked about connecting them. It took, it's only very recently that the InPen came out and that we're really going to be able to actually use pens in a larger system. Again, connect them to CGM and whatnot. And the apps obviously have come an incredibly long way. They were pretty primitive back in the day. And I like to say the biggest problem was that so much of the stuff was being designed by people who don't, not only don't have diabetes, but don't have any patient experience at all. It was being designed, it was just engineering driven or clinically driven, and it wasn't livable, and it didn't solve real world problems for people. And any devices or apps that just add more burden, it's not going to continue to be used, and it makes absolutely no sense,
No doubt. If you could look into your crystal ball for us, just for the next year, really. I know a lot of things were held up this year because of COVID. Things that we kind of expected in 2020 might be pushed to 2021 or further. I won't hold you to it. We're not going to really make a bet on this, but I'd love to get your take on what you're looking forward to in 2021.
Oh, thank you so much. So we were privileged to be able to host the first ever closed loop system showcase at our fall event last year. So the end of 2019, we had 6 of the companies that are getting closest to having or already have a system out. And it was just amazing. They came and they talked about the details of their algorithm and, what the targets are set at and whether the settings are customizable. And then we had patients there who had used these systems either in the real world or in studies. And I just think that there's going to be so much continued improvement on these systems. One very encouraging thing is that the studies are, no longer being done in some kind of clinical environment. They are doing real world studies where they literally go out and follow people while they actually go out and do sports and eat food and do things that real people do, So I think that's hugely important for kind of the form factor and just to understand how they can improve on the kind of day-to-day living experience with these systems. So I'm super excited about that. I do think also that insulin pens have, again, gone from just being another sort of thing that you use to stick the insulin in your skin to an actual tool that can help people figure out their dosing and help people keep track of their whole diabetes management regime, and, be connected to, your stream of glucose data, which helps you understand what's happening. So, all of this stuff is just getting so much more real world usable. And I think that's really going to be kind of the linchpin going forward. And it's already hard now for people who are newly diagnosed now to even understand how good they have it compared to what it was like, even when I was diagnosed in 2003. I mean, it was a world away. I mean, right?
What is the next event for DiabetesMine? I know things are up in the air with COVID.
So our, traditional pattern has been that we do the D-Data Exchange twice a year. So again, traditionally pre-COVID, it was in June on the Friday before the big ADA conference, wherever that happens to be. So we've done it in New Orleans, in San Diego, in Boston, Orlando, all the places, right? And then in fall, we would do this 2-day event, which was always in Northern California. It was at Stanford School of Medicine for years. It's also been at UCSF School of Medicine for the last couple of years. And that was we call the Innovation Summit Day, which was kind of this broader look. So it didn't only have to be technology. It could be anything that was innovative, whether that's a community program or whether we were talking about innovations in like coverage or community events, whatever, just a variety of different things about improving care. And then the D-Data Exchange Day, which was always the deep dive into technology. And that event kind of has a pattern to it. At least we've always done it so that we have a featured DIY talk. So we try to always get some interesting speaker from the DIY community to come and talk about something that they're working on that's cutting edge and new, and whether it just be about the community itself or about a particular tool. Then we traditionally had FDA come and speak because it's like, let's hear from them. They're so important in all of this. And then we have this lineup of demos that we always do, kind of cutting edge stuff. And that's been everything from, as you mentioned, new CGM systems to like apps that motivate teenagers to, in the past, we've even had some, things for diabetes complications, like socks that can monitor your feet for neuropathy.
Sorry.
But right now it's been also a lot of AI, machine learning driven platforms that are trying to help people better calculate their insulin doses or better predict what's going to happen when they eat certain things or do certain activities, different ways to be able to kind of glean meaning out of your data. Generally, we do June and then we do like early November. It kind of dawned on me that if ADA does not go back in person this coming June, which they may not, then we don't necessarily need to be tied to that date anymore. I mean, the idea originally was, everyone's in town, and it started that very first year that we did the bigger D-Data. ADA was in San Francisco, which is my hometown. So we're like, everyone's going to be here. So we'll just do this kind of afternoon thing before and get everyone together. And that's worked really well because physically people are, in from all over the world. But right now, everything's kind of footloose because of COVID.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about all this and sharing these stories and for doing the conference and putting it all out there. And we'll link up as much as we can if anybody missed it and wants to read all this stuff. It was really well covered on Twitter. I was following along the hashtag when I couldn't be there, and we'll get the word out. But Amy, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for being part of it. And I hope you will join us again sometime.
You got it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
More information about DiabetesMine, the D-Data Exchange, and that video we mentioned near the top of the interview, the video about representation, what people had to say. It's only 5 minutes. It's well worth your time. I'm going to put it in the Facebook group, and I will also link it up here in the show notes. Really interesting people. Definitely worth watching and worth possibly a follow if you're on Instagram or social media as well. Check them out. And I love talking to Amy because we always learn something new and see what new technology is coming. So, of course, more to come in the new year. Boy, I feel like there's a lot coming in 2021 that we've been waiting for. So I don't want to get too off track or into the future, but I'm excited. And I'm hoping to do an episode or two about a summary of what's coming. And I should also let you know, I've also got interviews lined up with some of the people that are releasing really cool stuff coming up. We've got a lot to look forward to when it comes to technology in the new year. Okay, tell me something good in just a moment. And it's an embarrassing personal story, but I will share because we're friends here. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. And almost everyone who takes insulin has experienced a low blood sugar. And that can be scary. A very low blood sugar is really scary. And that's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. It's the first auto-injector to treat very low blood sugar. Gvoke HypoPen is pre-mixed and ready to go with no visible needle. That means it's easy to use. In usability studies, 99% of people were able to give Gvoke correctly. I'm so glad to have something new. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Tell me something good this week is about my family. We are celebrating a diaversary. My son was diagnosed with type 1, as I always say, right before he turned 2, back in 2006, which means as hard as it is for me to believe, we are marking 14 years and that kid is going to be 16 pretty soon. So the story I want to tell you here for Tell Me Something Good, and if you're a new listener, he is doing great. Maybe that's the good news story I should start off with. He is happy, he is healthy, he is independent, he drives me bonkers. I want him to do more in his care. I want him to change his sites on the spot every 3 days and pre-bolus 15 minutes every time he eats. He doesn't do that. But you know what? He does so much. He's super responsible as far as I'm concerned. And he is almost 16. So for where he is and what I was told could happen during the teen years, I really keep my fingers crossed. I knock wood. I'll swing a dead chicken if you make me. I mean, I really feel like we have a lot to be thankful for. So having said that, this is a story about how we did everything wrong 14 years ago. Let me set the table. When Benny was diagnosed, I have a daughter. She is 3 years older than him. So she was just 5. Their birthdays fall in such a way that she had just turned 5. He was not yet 2. And my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, was living with us. It was a temporary situation. He was with us, I want to say, for about, year and a half. He was between jobs. We had 2 little kids. We both worked full time. He asked, hey, can I come stay with you for a little bit while I get things settled? And we said, please come down and be like a nanny. We can't have you here fast enough. And it was an amazing situation. It really was. Uncle David was just a godsend, great guy, and, left us and went back to a full-time job and a great life and a relationship and a situation where he now lives too far away. If you're listening, David, he's up in Pennsylvania. But he was there when Benny was diagnosed, which made our lives kind of easier. You had another caretaker in the house. When Slade and I took Benny right to the hospital on that Saturday morning, that first weekend in December 2nd, I always have to look up the date, December 2nd, 2006, David stayed home with Leah until we were ready to trade off and have her come visit and that kind of stuff. And we all learned how to do things together. So we came home 3 days later. We tried to go back with our lives. We were all kind of in the thick of things. And that Saturday night, the following week, Slade and I had tickets to go see a show. I'm a big Broadway fan, love that kind of stuff. And David said, you should go. I've got this. I know just as much as you guys do. And he really did. I'll watch the kids. Go, and you're a phone call away. So the theater in Charlotte, we have one of these regional theaters where the Broadway shows come traveling through. It's about 30 minutes from us. Yeah, if you really put the pedal to the metal, 25, but 30 to 35 minutes. So we thought, okay, this is good. Our doctor says, go on with your lives. We're going to go on with our lives. David's got this. The show was Spamalot, by the way. It was, very funny musical comedy. And we decided to go and enjoy ourselves. We got dressed up. We went. Not 20 minutes into the show, maybe 30 minutes into the show, Slade's phone starts buzzing and he gets up and leaves. If you are familiar with the show, this is just after He Is Not Dead Yet and the Lady of the Lake song. So I'm sitting there watching this very funny show, being amused, being entertained, but my husband is no longer sitting next to me and I know something's up, right? If he had come right back, it might have been something easy, just a question, but he's not back. I think I made it about halfway through the song that goes like this. I remember seeing that, which is the song that really just goes on and on. When that ended, because I wasn't going to run out of the theater when someone was singing, people applauded, and I booked it out into the lobby. And Slade was on the phone, pacing and talking and pacing and talking. Here's what had happened. David had given Benny an injection for dinner or snack. I don't even know, whatever it was. He gave him an injection. And remember, at this time, we're using a syringe and we're drawing up teeny, teeny, tiny doses. He's getting like 0.25 maybe for 20 carbs, I think. I mean, who remembers these doses? But they were minuscule. They didn't have half-unit pens at the time, and they certainly didn't have quarter-unit syringes. I don't think they have that, anything like that now. So unless you're using diluted insulin, which nobody had mentioned to me during his whole toddlerhood, you're really guessing at the dosage, and you're trying to eyeball these teeny tiny poofs and wisps of insulin. So David had tried to draw up like half a unit. I don't remember what the exact dose he was supposed to give was, but he gave him 2 full units, which was bigger than anything we had given before. It makes me laugh now because 2 units it's like a speck of dust for him now. But 2 units when you weigh 27 pounds is a huge deal. So what David and Slade had already done while I was sitting there watching people singing, they had already called the endocrinologist. And they had actually already gotten a call back. And that's what the phone call and the pacing, that's what was going on when I had walked out. He was on the phone with the doctor. And of course, they advised, check the blood sugar, give more carbs if needed. Nobody was panicking. So we didn't panic. His blood sugar was fine. David had checked it before he called. He checked it after the endocrinologist called back. He was fine. It gets a little weird because the dose had been given well before the phone call. It was one of those situations where David did it and then a while later thought, did I really do that? He absolutely swears that he gave the kid 2 units. But 2 hours later, his blood sugar hadn't dropped. So my suspicion at the time was you didn't give him 2 units. You probably drew it up and just misread the syringe, which was very easy to do at the time, especially when you're distracted by a toddler and a 5-year-old. Or the shot didn't go all the way in, or something really weird happened because his blood sugar stayed steady. We were checking with a meter. We didn't have a Dexcom at the time, but he was checking him every half an hour. We left the theater. We went home. We didn't want him to have to handle this by himself. And how are we going to enjoy Spamalot, right? If we're worried about Benny. We're now home probably close to 3 hours after the dose is given. His blood sugar was steady. We called the endocrinologist back and they said, look, it's 3 hours past the dose. If he hasn't dropped, he's not going to drop. You guys are okay. So we, being the terrible parents that we are, looked at each other and said, our friend was having a holiday party that we couldn't go to because we had tickets to Spamalot. David, do you mind if we go to the party now? I swear to you, we did. We left. We went to my friend's party. Now, my friend is only 10, 15 minutes away from my house. And it was 10 o'clock at night already. So we only went out for about an hour and a half. But yes, I left my sleeping baby. And he never woke up. Benny never even woke up with all those pokes, all those finger sticks to check his blood sugar, which I'm sure David did 10 more times before midnight. He slept through the whole thing. We were all worried, but not worried enough not to go to that party. I am the worst. We have always been the worst. But you know what? He was safe. And our endocrinologist gave us the correct information, told us what to look for, helped us through it. And there was no sense, as we saw it, not going to the party. So I know I'm a terrible parent. That's why I always say I'm the world's worst diabetes mom. I still have not seen Spamalot all the way through. So maybe when it comes back through Charlotte, I'll go back and make it through the first half of the first act. Oh my goodness. And hey, anybody dealing with a toddler or a baby with type 1 and those teeny tiny doses, I salute you. It's not easy. Getting an insulin pump makes it a little bit easier, but anything under the age of 5 is a circus. Well, type 1 is never easy no matter what age you are, but we're heading into 16-year-old with it, and that means driving, which is an adventure for another time. Before I let you go, quick reminder, Friends for Life is this weekend, the virtual conference. And if you were able to attend in July, you know they did an amazing job. If you weren't there, the one thing I will say that surprised me in a very good way was how much just schmoozing we were able to do. They had specific Zoom rooms for different ages, parents and teens and young adults with type 1. It was great. And I really wish I had put aside more time in July to attend the conference, because I didn't really understand how much just hanging out and socializing we'd be able to do. So I'm putting more time aside to attend this one, and I hope you can check it out as well. Again, link in the show notes. Hey, in the weeks to come, we're going to have a couple of more episodes in December, probably take one off the week of Christmas, even though I celebrate Hanukkah, but, we go with the flow. And I also want to just point out that this time of year, there are often a lot of approvals it just seems like that last week in December, there's usually a lot of news. So stay tuned. I know a lot of delays happened because of COVID. So, I'm not even sure what's been submitted to the FDA that was planned for this year. A lot of delays that way. But we will definitely be talking about it. Make sure you follow on social media for the latest and greatest. And thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much as you listen. And if you've listened this long, I really appreciate it. Got a little chatty this week with that story about Benny and Uncle David, but I appreciate you listening. I'm Stacey Simms. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.